Welcome back, happy Canuary. It is canning season and today's video is a super important one. I am going to tell you all of the things that I've screwed up on along the way so that you don't have to. First and foremost, most important is safety. You want to make sure that you're following a safe and trusted recipe, which would be the USDA or ball or your local extension. And it is not something like this book. So I bought this book online and it is not a safe and tested recipe. So I would say don't buy this book if you are a beginner. I still have it because I'm using it just for reference, but what I'm doing with it is I'm looking at the recipes, then I'm comparing like the soup recipes, like build your own soups. I'm comparing to see what's safe and what's unsafe. And there's a lot of unsafe advice in this book. So if you're starting out, don't even buy this book. Stick to the ones that are safe, trusted, tested, very important. The next mistake I made, which came out of this book, was I put clear gel into a savory item, and clear gel has only been tested for items like pie fillings. So not safe. We want to make sure that we're following safe and tested recipes. Well, I should say it's not necessarily not safe, but it's not tested. And if it's not tested, we don't know if it's safe or not. So err on the side of caution and don't do it. The next tip, which is super important, has to do with the temperature that you're canning at. And so when you're canning, it really depends what altitude you're at for how long or how high of a pressure you can things at. The higher the pressure, the higher the temperature. So for pressure canning, for my location, which is Mile High, 5,280 feet above sea level, I need 15 pounds of pressure, and that's fine. I always did that right. However, where it came to getting confusing is right here for water bath canning, because on the recipe, it tells you the base for sea level, and then you have to, on your own, add in the adjustment. So let me show you. Okay, so for 5,280, I need to increase by 10 minutes. So for 20 to 25 to 30 for my pints or my quarts, hot or raw pack. So I need to always add 10 minutes on. And if I forget, that means that these items didn't process long enough and we can't consider them safe. The next item has to do with the canner, also has to do with safety, and it's how much water to put in. That can be a little bit hard to tell, and it might take a little bit of practice, because also if you have the temperature go really high, the water can, evaporate out really quickly. So when you're putting your water in, make sure you've got it a good ways, maybe like at least like up to almost the middle of your jar if you're pressure canning, because otherwise it could evaporate and get completely dry on the bottom. And if it's dry, there's no water to boil, which means your pressure isn't getting as high and you're not cooking your ingredient to the right temperature. Similarly, if you're water bath canning, that water has to stay above the jars the entire time. So err on the side of caution, add a lot of water in, just in case you have a few inches of evaporation during the process. Now, when it comes to actually canning, you've got your water figured out, you've got your pressure figured out. Now we've got our items. Of course, you're following a recipe, and now it gets to the point where you are putting on the ring. And this is where the recipe can't really help you. This is a feel thing, and everything says finger tight. And what is finger tight? So the mistake that I made was not putting them on tight enough. And if you don't put them on tight enough, they will not seal. And so to me, finger tight was like, okay, my fingers are just barely doing it. That's not finger tight though. Finger tight is like, put it on and crank it a little. Don't really crank it, because if you go too far, then you could have buckling in your lid, and that's like where the lid pops up and like has little divots almost, but like opposite of divots, and that's not safe either. So this is kind of a feel thing. It's going to take you a little bit tight, but not overly cranked. And then when your jars come out of the canner, of course, you leave them sit for 24 hours without touching them. I have not had that one go wrong, but here's where I did. When you go to store it, you do not want to store it with the ring. So take your ring off, store it this way, because then if your seal gives up, there's no way for you to get a false seal, like the seal sealing itself back down, which I recently had one that did it. And the only way I knew was because of the little pop on the top. But make sure, keep your rings somewhere else. The next most important thing is make sure you've got your stove on high enough when you are starting your pressure canner, because I did not have my stove hot enough when I first started canning, and the very first time I could not get this little valve to come up for anything. There was no way, it was not going to vent, and I did not know what I was doing wrong. So when you put your items in your pressure canner, crank up the heat all the way, unless, you know, you have cold items in there, then little by little crank it up. But you want it to be very hot in order to build that temperature, and then after you've built the temperature, you've put the lid on, you've let it vent, and you've put the weight on, you can start to back that down a little bit, because you don't want to have too much heat, but you definitely need that big burst to get it going. But then, you know, back it down over the course of the next few minutes, and then you'll probably end on a medium heat, but a medium heat likely won't be enough to get you going. Ending just kind of like how I began, with safety of the products, is to make sure that you're following those tested recipes, not only for safety, but for quality too. When I first started, I saw online that you could just throw beans in a jar, add some water, and then can them. And one, that's not a safe and tested recipe, but two, they don't come out as well. They are much better if you follow the process by soaking the beans overnight and then doing a quick boil or a quick soak for an hour or so, and then canning them. They turn out so much better, they taste better, they make your stomach feel better. So a lot of times those recipes in the book are just as much for quality as they are for safety. Okay, those are the tips that I have for you today. If you have any additional tips, please leave them down below. We want everyone to be canning safely this month during Canuary, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're new here and you haven't yet, please subscribe. I would love to have you here, and if you want to check out some more canning videos, I will pop some here. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.